Hi everyone, Aaron here for Zollotech, and the iPhone 15 Pro Max has been my main phone over the past 3 months or 90 days. I thought we'd go over sort of a long-term review, as much as 3 months is long-term, and go over 10 things that I noticed since I've been using it. The first thing is the design. I appreciate the design, and going back to the iPhone 14s or back to the iPhone 12s where they sort of introduced the squared off edges again, I actually appreciate the smooth edges more and more every day. The first thing I noticed is the fingerprints. While they actually are quite prevalent on the blue titanium, they don't really bother me as I'm not looking at the sides that often. They don't look great. Of course, if you put a case on this, it fixes that issue. But on the regular natural titanium, I haven't wiped this one off at all, and this is just from me picking it up here. You'll see there's no marks whatsoever. So if the fingerprints bother you, definitely get the natural titanium version. Now, the next thing I noticed is the scratches and the overall finish. If you have one of the different iPhones that actually is blue, or maybe the black iPhone, you actually have a coating on it that seems to maybe chip if you drop this. I've shown this before in the upper right here. I haven't dropped it since the initial one where I dropped it on a tile floor from about 2 or 3 feet, and it actually nicked the edge here on the bottom and chipped off some of the finish. Again, this doesn't bother me too much as some mistakes happen, but it's something that definitely might concern quite a few people, and if you want to keep it pristine, you either need to put a case on it or be extra careful with it this year due to that. The same is true with the scratches. The scratches on this one seem to be much more extreme than the iPhone 14 and even iPhone 13 in my case. So I've used both of those phones regularly full time, and you'll see in the bottom right here, there are a bunch of scratches. I'm not exactly sure where they've actually come from, but I don't have those on older phones. I have some toward the top, there's random scratches across the screen, and I'm not sure where most of them have come from. I'm very careful with the phone other than it actually slipping out of my pocket onto my tile floor. And again, that was only a couple feet and nothing major. It didn't crack the screen or anything, and I rarely, if ever, have dropped my phone since the initial iPhone when it was released in 2007. So the screen is definitely more fragile, and that's the reason I put a screen protector on this iPhone right away, right after picking it up with the natural titanium. So I would recommend that, again, if you care about that. The next thing I noticed is 5G connectivity is quite fast. Wi-Fi is as well, but the 5G modem, it seems to be about doubly fast. So if we go to maybe a website here, we'll go to Apple. You'll see it loads nice and fast on Wi-Fi. If I turn off Wi-Fi and maybe just go to speed test, and you'll see the download speeds are over 500 megabits per second, and we only have about 3 bars of 5G UC on T-Mobile. We'll give it a moment for the upload, and you'll see the upload is much less. Now, I've seen this at my house go well above 50 or even 80, and that's only with 1 bar, so I'm not sure why it's so slow, but I am in a brick building, and it's completely surrounded, and it's not very good as far as the upload speeds go, but the download speeds in general, I get incredible speeds, and I use this to upload footage sometimes. If I want to upload a YouTube video on the go, I find that it's plenty fast and usually around 50 megabits per second depending where I am. If I'm outside, maybe sitting in a car or something like that. The next thing I noticed after using this for a while is I really like the action button. It's just more that it's useful instead of just flipping a switch, turning it off to sort of silence it. Now I actually have a function for it. So if we press and hold, I have it just set to the flashlight, but it's something that I appreciate and I use all the time at night, maybe to walk around the house, not wake people up turning lights on. So that's something I use. Of course, you could switch this to maybe shortcuts or more. So if we go into our action button here, let's switch this to dark mode. And you'll see I have it as flashlight, but if you wanted to use it maybe with shortcuts, that's probably the best case scenario there, but I like that we have translate and more. So whatever you want to pick, maybe we'll get some new features with that in the future as well. One thing I would like to see them update though is maybe some options for double pressing or maybe pressing and holding or even triple pressing. If we double press, we could have an additional function, triple press, maybe have something else. I would love to see that maybe updated in the future. Now, daily use is the next thing I noticed, that it just mostly works other than maybe issues with iOS. So using it feels very familiar. It's much like going back to other phones, the iPhone 12, even back to the iPhone 10. It feels familiar with additional features. It's nice and fast and just works mostly out of the way. Also, the display is great, and it's something that you really have to see to appreciate, but not just because it's ProMotion, but it's just super high resolution, goes incredibly bright outside, incredibly bright with HDR footage, and it's just a joy to look at. It's something that doesn't hurt my eyes with PWM, it doesn't seem to really be affected as long as you're above 39% brightness. It's close to DC dimming, and it's pretty easy on the eyes as far as an OLED display is concerned. So I'm pretty happy with the display overall. Viewing angles are great, and I don't know that they could do much better than this other than maybe make it even brighter than it is already. We've got 2000 nits here, 2000 nits on the Apple Watch, and it's just overall very impressive. The next thing I noticed and really appreciate is the cameras are better than they ever have been, especially for video. Photos are pretty familiar. They seem pretty much the same as what we had with last year's model, but using them for video is on another level, especially if you use ProRes RAW with maybe log footage. So if you want to use that with video footage, I've used that for different videos. I'm not using it right now, but you could record this video with it, and you probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference when you're on YouTube. Apple's actually filmed an entire keynote with it, and we didn't know until the end. So it's very impressive. And yes, they had some additional tools, but typically lighting is key with that. And as long as you have the right light, it looks pretty phenomenal as long as it's graded properly. So that's something I'm very impressed with. No, it doesn't have incredible zoom like some of its competitors, but in general, I'm pretty happy with the footage, and I normally don't use the telephoto zoom lens anyway. I'll use a different camera for that. So I'll typically just use the main lens or sometimes the ultra wide, or take a portrait here and there, but I rarely use the telephoto zoom. So for me, this is one of the best updates in years with the video camera. Now, speakers are the next thing I noticed, that they sound great and give a nice stereo sound. So if we go into one of my videos, so I have my watch set up to measure decibels, and then we have the phone here on one of my comparison videos so we can take a look at it and hear some of the music from it. So I'll move my microphone. And the speakers, I think, sound pretty great. At the highest level, around 80 decibels, they don't sound really that distorted, maybe a little bit, but at the highest volume, that's pretty typical. The top speaker doesn't rattle like some people's have actually had that. I don't have that on either of these iPhones, and I haven't heard it myself. But at the very highest level, you could hear a little bit of distortion, bring it down a little bit, and that goes away. I think it sounds pretty good for around 75 decibels if you want to watch a movie, watch YouTube, or something else. Now, as far as speed and performance, that's the next thing I mentioned, where it's just generally fast overall. Early on, with some iOS updates, we may have had some issues, but just basically going back and forth, swiping through different apps, going into music, things loading. Unless you have slow Wi-Fi or slow connectivity in general, most of the time it just feels super fast, whether that's going into a game, loading an app like Journal, you want to journal something, or maybe just going into the weather to check that. I typically use this for social media and really have no issues with it. The only issue I might have is when I'm running betas is the battery life in general. Now, some people have actually experienced some battery drain initially with the overall battery health, but if we take a look at the actual cycles on the phone at the time of this video, you'll see we're currently at 76 cycles. So I've been using it full time every single day, with the exception of maybe testing a couple other phones once the iPhone 15 launched initially. Now, if we go into the battery, go to battery health and charging, you'll see I'm still at 100%. You'll see coconut battery here with all the other statistics. And as far as battery life, well, I am on a beta at the time of this video, so I'm getting about pretty poor battery life. 2 hours and 59 minutes of screen active time, 3 hours and 9 minutes of screen idle time, and used almost, well, I'm at 64% right now. If we take a look at the day before, I used 100% of my battery and only had 5.5 hours of screen active time. This has made me want to try iOS 17.2.1 full-time that I have on this iPhone 15 Pro Max, as that actually resolves an issue with the battery. So hopefully it actually increases quite a bit for most people, but on betas, I don't really expect to get great battery life anyway. And to charge my battery, I typically use wireless charging, and in my Audi is the only place it's an issue. Early on, we had some issues with BMWs, we had some issues charging in general, or the phone just just getting overly hot for some people. However, in my Audi, it hasn't been resolved where you put it on the wireless charger built in and the phone gets so hot you can barely touch it. And I noticed this using CarPlay. I had hoped the latest updates fixed it, but I actually had navigation start to sort of stutter and everything slowed down. So I looked at the phone and it said it was too hot to start charging again. So that's something where I just use USB-C. Maybe Apple will work that out in the future, but I typically use fast charging with MagSafe and haven't had any issues. So I'll use a MagSafe charger typically at night before I go to bed, and it's worked just fine. Also, one of the other things I really appreciate that I didn't mention earlier on with the display is actually the standby mode. This is something I really like that my wife isn't a huge fan of because it tends to wake her up. But when I'm on a desk, maybe editing a video, I'll have this on, see the time, or you can have it rotate through photos and things like that. It's something I really appreciate. I like the animations, and it's just a nice little addition, a little nicety that you expect typically from Apple that they introduce every so often. Now, of course, I do expect iOS features to improve over the years, and with iOS 18, we should hopefully get some sort of redesign to sort of match what we have with the action button controls or maybe something else. Hopefully we get some changes though that are different than what we've had in previous years design-wise, but we should have support for many years to come with the iPhone 15 Pro Max. But if you're wondering if you should wait for iPhone 16 next year or pick one of these up now, well, it really depends what phone you have currently. If you have an iPhone 14 Pro Max, I'd probably say wait at this point if you're fairly happy with it. If you're not happy with it, or maybe you're on an older phone, an iPhone 10, an iPhone 8, 8 Plus, where you can't get iOS 17, then sure, you could upgrade to it, especially if you could get a discount, maybe around the holidays or just in general from your carrier. Otherwise, again, I'd probably wait as we are expecting some changes with iPhone 16 where we think we'll have an additional button, maybe sort of a capture button that's been rumored. Of course, the A18 Pro processor, additional upgrades to the cameras with 48 megapixels, and maybe some other things as well. But I don't expect any major updates in the future as far as maybe September when iPhone 16 releases. Otherwise, I think it's probably a pretty safe bet to pick one up now and just wait for software updates. Let me know if you have an iPhone 15 Pro or 15 Pro Max in the comments below. What color is it? Do you prefer the blue, the black, white, or the natural titanium? I'll probably switch to the natural titanium just for now for that update that I mentioned earlier, but let me know your experience so far in the comments below. Of course, I'll link this wallpaper in the description like I normally do, and if you haven't subscribed already, please subscribe, and if you enjoyed the video, please give it a like. As always, thanks for watching. This is Aaron. I'll see you next time.